The stars had always called to humanity. For thousands of years, people looked up at the night sky and wondered what secrets waited in the darkness between the lights. In the year 2157, they finally had their answer, and it was not the answer anyone had hoped for. Captain Daniel Hayes stood on the bridge of the starship Endeavour and watched the viewscreen with tired eyes. His ship had been traveling for 3 weeks, following a strange signal that came from deep space. 2 other vessels traveled beside him, the Aurora and the Horizon. Together they carried 600 souls into the unknown. "We are approaching the coordinates now, Captain," said his navigation officer, a young woman named Nicole Reyes. Her voice was calm, but Daniel could see the excitement in her eyes. This was the moment humanity had dreamed about since the first caveman looked up at the moon. Daniel nodded slowly. "Bring us out of faster-than-light travel. Nice and easy." The ship shuddered as it dropped back into normal space. For a moment, there was nothing on the view screen except stars. Then Nicole gasped, and Daniel understood why. Before them floated a station larger than anything humans had ever built. It was a ring of metal and light, spinning slowly against the backdrop of a purple nebula. Hundreds of ships surrounded it, vessels of every shape and size. Some looked like insects, others resembled fish or birds. None of them looked anything like human ships. "My God," Daniel whispered. "We are not alone." A voice crackled through the communication system. It spoke in a language that sounded like music and thunder combined. Then, somehow, the words changed into English. "Unknown vessels, you have entered council space. Identify yourselves immediately or face destruction." Daniel took a deep breath. This was the moment he had trained for his entire life. "This is Captain Daniel Hayes of the Earth vessel Endeavour. We come in peace, representing the United Nations of Earth. We wish to establish diplomatic contact." There was a long silence. Then the voice returned, and this time it sounded almost amused. "Earth? We have no record of this world. You will dock at the station and present yourselves to the Galactic Council. Do not attempt to flee." Daniel looked at his crew. Their faces showed a mixture of fear and wonder. He gave them a small smile that he did not feel. "Well, people, looks like we have a meeting to attend." The council chamber was vast beyond imagination. Daniel walked beside Ambassador Lisa Monroe, Earth's diplomatic representative. She was a small woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen 50 years of political battles. Behind them walked a security team of 8 soldiers, their weapons hidden beneath formal uniforms. 12 alien species sat in elevated seats arranged in a circle around a central platform. Some of them had scales, others had fur or feathers or skin that seemed to shift colors with each breath. All of them looked down at the humans with expressions that ranged from curiosity to open contempt. The largest of them spoke first. He was a creature that stood 3 meters tall, with 4 arms and a face that seemed carved from stone. His name, they had been told, was High Chancellor Vorthax of the Dominion species. "So, these are the creatures from the unregistered world," Vorthax said. His voice echoed through the chamber like distant thunder. "They are even smaller than the report suggested." Laughter rippled through the chamber. Daniel felt his hands curl into fists at his sides, but Lisa remained perfectly calm. "High Chancellor," she said, her voice clear and strong, "humanity comes before this council with respect and hope. We have only recently developed the technology to travel between stars. We seek friendship and mutual understanding with all species." Vorthax leaned forward, and his eyes, which burned like orange coals, fixed on Lisa with predatory interest. "Friendship? Little creature, you misunderstand your position. The Galactic Council has governed this region of space for 50,000 years. We do not make friends with primitive species. We rule them." Lisa did not flinch. With respect, Chancellor, Earth is a sovereign world. We govern ourselves. We are happy to establish trade relations and cultural exchange, but we will not submit to any outside authority. The silence that followed was absolute. Daniel watched the aliens exchange glances that seemed to mix shock and amusement. No one had ever spoken to the council this way, he realized. No one had ever dared. Vorthax rose from his seat, all four of his massive arms spreading wide. You refuse to submit? A species that has traveled among the stars for less than a single generation refuses the authority of the council. We refuse to be slaves, Lisa replied simply. That is not negotiable. Something changed in Vorthax's expression. The amusement disappeared, replaced by something cold and terrible. Then you have chosen extinction. All who defy the council are destroyed. This is the law that has maintained order for 50,000 years. Before Daniel could react, Vorthax raised one hand and made a gesture. Through the massive windows of the chamber, Daniel saw the ships surrounding the station begin to move. They turned toward the three small human vessels floating helplessly in the void. No! Daniel shouted, but it was too late. Two beams of blinding light shot from the alien warships. The Aurora and the Horizon exploded in balls of orange fire. 200 crew members, people Daniel had known for years, people who had families waiting for them back home, died in an instant. Lisa grabbed Daniel's arm. We need to get back to the ship, now. They ran. Somehow, through chaos and screaming alarms, they made it back to the Endeavor. Nicole was already at her station, her face pale with terror. Get us out of here, Daniel ordered. His voice sounded strange in his own ears, hollow and distant. Maximum speed, now! The Endeavor's engines screamed as the ship fled into faster-than-light travel. Behind them, Vorthax's voice echoed through the communication system one final time. You have 30 cycles to surrender your world, little creatures. If you refuse, we will come to your Earth. We will burn your cities and poison your oceans. We will erase every trace of your species from existence. This is not a threat. This is a promise. Daniel stood alone on the bridge as his ship raced toward home. He thought about the 200 people who had died. He thought about his wife and his daughter waiting for him on Earth. He thought about 7 billion humans who had no idea what was coming for them. The stars no longer looked beautiful to him. They looked like the eyes of predators, watching from the darkness, waiting to strike. Humanity had made first contact, and it had gone terribly, horribly wrong. The Endeavor limped into Earth's orbit with smoke pouring from its damaged hull. Daniel had not slept in 4 days. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the Aurora and the Horizon exploding, saw the bodies of his friends tumbling through the vacuum of space. Within hours of their arrival, a shuttle carried Daniel and Lisa down to Geneva, Switzerland, where the United Nations Emergency Council had already gathered. Every major nation had sent their leaders. Every military commander on Earth waited in that massive underground bunker, their faces tight with fear and confusion. President Nathan Clark of the United States stood at the center of the room. He was a tall man with silver hair and eyes that had seen too many crises. Beside him stood Admiral Rebecca Torres, the commander of Earth's combined space forces. She was younger than most of the people in the room, but no one doubted her courage or her intelligence. Captain Hayes, Ambassador Monroe, President Clark said, please tell us exactly what happened out there. Lisa stepped forward. Her voice was steady, but Daniel could see the tremor in her hands. We made contact with an organization called the Galactic Council. They claim to have ruled this region of space for 50,000 years. When we refused to surrender our sovereignty, they destroyed 2 of our ships without warning and gave us 30 days to submit to their authority. Voices erupted throughout the room. Leaders shouted questions and accusations. Some demanded immediate surrender. Others called for war. The chaos continued until Admiral Torres raised her hand for silence. "What are we facing?" she asked. "How large is their fleet?" Daniel answered this question himself. "Based on what we saw at their station, they have thousands of ships, maybe tens of thousands. Their weapons are far more advanced than ours. Their shields stopped everything we tried to throw at them during our escape." "Then we must negotiate," said a voice from the crowd. Daniel recognized the speaker as the representative from Germany. "We cannot fight an enemy so powerful. We must find terms they will accept." Lisa shook her head slowly. "I spent my entire career in diplomacy. I know how to read people, how to find common ground. These aliens do not want negotiation. They want submission. They see us as insects to be crushed beneath their feet. The only terms they will accept are our complete surrender and enslavement." "Then what do you suggest we do?" President Clark asked. Silence fell over the room. No one had an answer. The mathematics were simple and terrible. Earth had 47 warships capable of combat. The Council had thousands. Conventional warfare would lead to extinction within hours of the first battle. Then a woman stood up from a seat in the corner of the room. She was short and plain-looking, with glasses that seemed too big for her face. Her name was Dr. Megan Price, and she led Earth's Advanced Research Division. "There might be another way," she said. Every eye in the room turned to her. Dr. Price walked to the central display table and pressed a series of buttons. Holographic images appeared in the air, showing strange devices that pulsed with dark energy. "For the past 50 years, our division has been working on weapons based on quantum physics and dark matter manipulation. We never told the public about these projects because, honestly, they scared us. The destructive potential is beyond anything humanity has ever created." Admiral Torres stepped closer to the display, her eyes wide. "Why are we only hearing about this now?" "Because we hoped we would never need them," Dr. Price replied. "These weapons are unstable, dangerous. In some tests, they caused damage we could not predict or control. But they also did something remarkable. They ignored conventional shields completely. They passed through armor as if it did not exist." The room erupted again, but this time the voices carried a different tone. Hope. Desperate, fragile hope. "Can you build enough of these weapons in 30 days?" President Clark asked. Dr. Price hesitated. "We have prototypes. Given unlimited resources and every engineer on the planet working together, we might be able to retrofit our existing fleet. But I must be honest with you. These weapons have never been tested in actual combat. We do not know if they will work when we need them most." Daniel spoke for the first time since his report. "Does it matter? If we surrender, we lose everything anyway. Our freedom, our culture. Our children will grow up as slaves. At least this way, we have a chance." President Clark looked around the room at the gathered leaders. He saw fear in their eyes, but he also saw determination. These were people who had spent their lives fighting for their nations, their ideals, their people. They would not simply roll over and accept extinction. "We have no choice," he said finally. "Begin the work immediately. Every nation will contribute everything they have. We will face this enemy together as one species, one Earth." Far away in the depths of space, the Galactic Council assembled the largest fleet in its history. Ships from 12 different species gathered around Vorthax's command station, their crews eager for the coming slaughter. Vorthax stood before the assembled admirals and generals of 100 worlds. His voice boomed through the chamber as he addressed them. "The humans are a young species. They have known the stars for barely a generation. Yet they dare to defy us. They dare to refuse the authority that has maintained peace for 50,000 years. He paused, and a cruel smile crossed his stone-like face. "We will teach them the price of defiance. We will burn their world and scatter their ashes across the void. And when we are done, we will use their example to remind every other primitive species why the Council must never be challenged. The gathered aliens roared their approval. To them, this was not a war. It was pest control. The humans were nothing more than an annoyance to be eliminated and forgotten. They had no idea what was coming. On Earth, factories that once built cars began building weapons. Scientists who once competed for funding now shared every secret they knew. Soldiers from nations that had been enemies for centuries trained side by side. Humanity had 30 days to prepare for the greatest battle in its history. It would not be enough time. It could never be enough time. But humans were stubborn creatures. They had survived ice ages and plagues and countless wars against themselves. They had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars with nothing but determination and dreams. Now they would fight for their right to exist, and they would show the galaxy that Earth does not surrender. Not today, not ever. The shipyards of Mars had never been so loud. Day and night, the sound of welding torches and power tools echoed through the massive orbital platforms. Workers who had slept only a few hours in the past week pushed themselves beyond all limits, knowing that every minute counted. Tyler Marsh was the chief designer of Earth's space fleet. He was a big man with rough hands and tired eyes. For 20 years, he had built starships designed for exploration and trade. Now he tore them apart and rebuilt them as weapons of war. "We need more power cells for Section 7, he shouted over the noise. "And someone get me an update on the Cascade Lance installation." The Cascade Lance was Dr. Price's masterpiece, a weapon that fired concentrated dark matter in a beam that could pass through any known shield or armor. Tyler had seen the test results. A single shot had vaporized a target the size of a small moon. The thought of mounting such a weapon on a ship made him nervous. But he had no choice. His workers swarmed over the massive shape of the Defiance, the largest warship humanity had ever built. Captain Daniel Hayes would command this ship in the coming battle. Tyler had met Daniel once, briefly. He had seen the haunted look in the captain's eyes, the weight of 200 dead crew members pressing down on his shoulders. Tyler understood that weight. Every ship he built, every weapon he installed, would determine whether people lived or died. The responsibility was almost too heavy to bear. In another part of the solar system, Commander Derek Palmer stood before a room filled with young pilots. They sat in rows of chairs, their faces showing a mixture of fear and determination. Most of them were barely old enough to vote. In a few weeks, they would fly into a battle that many of them would not survive. "I am not going to lie to you," Derek said. His voice was calm and steady, the voice of a man who had flown combat missions since before some of these pilots were born. "The enemy has more ships than we can count. Their technology is more advanced than ours. By every standard of military strategy, we should lose this fight." He paused, letting his words sink in. The young pilots shifted in their seats, exchanging nervous glances. "But here is what the enemy does not understand," Derek continued. "Numbers do not win battles. Technology does not win battles. Courage wins battles. Determination wins battles. The will to fight when every odd is against you, that is what wins battles." He walked among the rows of chairs, looking each pilot in the eye. "You are going to fly ships that are smaller and weaker than anything the enemy has. But you are going to fly them with more skill and more heart than any alien pilot has ever seen. You are going to make them fear you. You are going to make them remember the name of Earth until the last star burns out." The pilots straightened in their seats. Something changed in their eyes, something that looked almost like fire. Derek nodded slowly. These young people might die in the coming battle, but they would not die as victims. They would die as warriors. Back on Earth, the evacuation continued without rest. Dr. Ashley Brooks coordinated the massive effort to move billions of people into underground bunkers carved deep into the planet's crust. It was the largest movement of humanity in history, and it was happening in less than a month. Children cried as they were separated from their parents, sent to different shelters for their own protection. Elderly people struggled through long lines, carrying only what they could hold in their trembling hands. The weight of fear hung over everything like a dark cloud. Ashley walked through one of the largest shelters, located beneath the Rocky Mountains. Thousands of people filled the massive cavern, their faces illuminated by harsh artificial light. She stopped to comfort a young mother who sat alone, clutching a photograph of a man in a military uniform. "My husband is on the Defiance," the woman whispered. "He volunteered for the most dangerous position on the ship. He said someone had to do it." Ashley knelt beside her and took her hand. "Your husband is very brave, and we are going to do everything possible to bring him home to you." The woman looked up with tears in her eyes. "Do you really believe we can win?" Ashley hesitated. She had seen the reports. She knew the odds. But she also knew that humanity had faced impossible situations before and somehow found a way to survive. "I believe in the people fighting for us," she said finally. "That is enough for me." High above the earth, Daniel Hayes walked through the corridors of the Defiance. The ship was nearly complete now. Its hull gleamed with new armor. Its weapons hummed with barely contained power. It was the most beautiful and terrible thing he had ever seen. He reached the bridge and found his crew already at their stations. Nicole Reyes sat at the tactical console, her fingers dancing over controls as she ran system checks. She looked up when he entered and gave him a small smile. "Captain, the ship is ready. All systems are functioning within normal parameters." Daniel nodded and walked to his command chair. Through the massive view screen, he could see Earth floating in the darkness, a blue and green jewel wrapped in white clouds. Somewhere down there, his wife and daughter waited in one of the underground shelters. He had said goodbye to them 3 days ago, and the memory of his daughter's tears still burned in his heart. He pressed a button on his chair, opening a channel to the entire fleet. 47 ships waited in formation around Earth, ready to face thousands of enemies. It was a tiny force, a desperate force, but it was all they had. "This is Captain Hayes to all ships," he said. "In a few hours, the enemy will arrive. They believe this will be an easy victory. They believe we are weak because we are young. They are wrong." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I have served with many of you for years. I have seen your courage and your dedication. I know what you are capable of. Tomorrow, we will show the galaxy what humanity can do when we stand together." His voice grew stronger, filled with a conviction he had not known he possessed. "We fight for our families. We fight for our world. We fight for the right of every human being to live free. Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this: we are not alone. We carry the hopes of every person on Earth with us. We cannot fail them. We will not fail them." He closed the channel and sat back in his chair. The waiting was almost over. Soon the greatest battle in human history would begin. And Daniel Hayes would be ready. They came out of faster-than-light travel like a storm rolling across the sky. 8,000 ships, stretching across the darkness of space in a wall of metal and fire. The Galactic Council Armada was the largest military force ever assembled in the history of the Orion Arm, and it had come to destroy a single small world. Admiral Rebecca Torres stood in the command center of the orbital station Guardian, watching the enemy fleet appear on her screens. Her face showed no fear, only cold determination. Beside her, holographic displays tracked every ship, every weapon, every possible scenario. "All ships, maintain formation," she said into her communicator. "Do not fire until they cross the Mars threshold. We need them close." The Council fleet advanced with contemptuous slowness. They had no reason to hurry. This was not a battle to them. It was an execution. The alien commanders expected the humans to panic, to scatter, to beg for mercy. Instead, the tiny Earth fleet held its position in perfect silence. On the flagship of the Council Armada, High Chancellor Vorthax watched the approaching planet with satisfaction. Earth hung in the distance like a ripe fruit waiting to be picked. Its defenders were pathetic, barely 50 ships against his thousands. "The humans do not run," observed one of his admirals. "Curious." Vorthax made a dismissive gesture with one of his forearms. "They have nowhere to run. Their courage is meaningless. Within the hour their fleet will be dust and their world will burn." He gave the order to advance. The Armada surged forward, eager to claim easy glory. On the bridge of the Defiance, Daniel Hayes gripped the arms of his command chair as the enemy fleet grew larger on his view screen. His heart pounded in his chest, but his hands were steady. Around him, his crew worked in focused silence. Nicole Reyes looked up from her tactical console. "Captain, the enemy has crossed the Mars threshold. We have firing solution on the lead ships." Daniel nodded slowly. This was the moment. Everything they had worked for, everything they had sacrificed, came down to this single instant. "All ships," he said, his voice carrying across the fleet. "Fire!" The Cascade Lance activated for the first time in actual combat. A beam of absolute darkness shot from the nose of the Defiance, a ribbon of concentrated destruction that moved faster than the eye could follow. It struck the lead Council ship and simply erased it from existence. No explosion, no debris. The ship was there, and then it was not. The beam continued through the void, striking ship after ship. 17 vessels vanished in that first shot, their crews never knowing what killed them. For a moment, nothing happened. Then chaos erupted. The Council fleet broke formation as panic spread through their ranks. Their shields, perfected over thousands of years, did nothing. Their armor, thick enough to survive nuclear explosions, offered no protection. Weapons they could not understand were tearing them apart. Admiral Torres smiled grimly as she watched the enemy scatter. "All ships, engage. Show them what humanity can do." The Earth fleet surged forward. Smaller vessels deployed quantum torpedoes that phased through matter before detonating inside enemy ships. Alien cruisers exploded from within, their hulls tearing apart as their own reactors went critical. Fighters piloted by Derek Palmer's young pilots danced through the battlefield with impossible skill, drawing fire away from the larger ships and striking at vulnerable targets. The battle raged for hours. The Council forces regrouped and counterattacked, their superior numbers beginning to tell. Earth ships took damage, some were destroyed. Commander Palmer watched helplessly as 3 of his best pilots disappeared in balls of fire, their sacrifice buying precious seconds for the fleet. On the Defiance, alarms screamed as enemy weapons found their mark. A section of the hull tore open, exposing 3 decks to the vacuum of space. Fires erupted in the engine room. Bodies floated past the view screen, crew members who had died at their posts. Nicole Reyes worked frantically at her console, blood running down her face from a gash on her forehead. "Captain, the Cascade Lance is overheating. If we fire again, it might explode." Daniel looked at the view screen. Thousands of enemy ships still filled the void. The Earth fleet had been reduced to less than 20 vessels. They were winning, impossibly winning, but it was not enough. More enemy ships kept coming. "Fire again," he ordered. Nicole met his eyes. She understood what he was asking. She nodded and pressed the firing control. The Cascade Lance screamed with power as it discharged one final time. The beam was brighter than before, more powerful, more unstable. It carved through the enemy fleet like a blade through paper, destroying over 100 ships in a single devastating sweep. Then the weapon exploded. The Defiance shuddered as secondary explosions ripped through its forward sections. Daniel was thrown from his chair, slamming into a console with enough force to crack his ribs. Through blurry vision, he saw the view screen flicker and die. "Report!" he gasped, pulling himself upright. Nicole's voice came from somewhere in the smoke-filled darkness. We have lost the main weapon, Captain. Hull integrity at 30%, but the enemy is retreating. Daniel stumbled to the view screen and manually restored power. What he saw made him want to weep with relief. The Council Armada was fleeing. Thousands of ships that had come to destroy Earth were now racing away at maximum speed, leaving behind the burning wreckage of their comrades. Only 3,000 vessels remained of the original 8,000. Vorthax stood on the bridge of his crippled flagship, staring at the destruction around him in disbelief. His stone-like face showed an emotion he had never felt before: fear. "This is impossible," he whispered. "They are primitives. How could primitives do this?" No one answered him. There was no answer. The Council had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years by crushing every species that dared to resist. Now, for the first time, they had met a species that fought back and won. Admiral Torres opened a channel to the surviving Earth ships. "All vessels hold position. The enemy is retreating. We have won." Daniel slumped in his command chair, surrounded by the broken remains of his beautiful ship. 11 vessels remained of the 47 that had begun the battle. Thousands of humans had died, but Earth still stood. Humanity still lived. He thought of his wife and daughter in their shelter beneath the surface. He thought of the billions of people who had waited helplessly while others fought for their survival. He thought of the 200 crew members who had died at the beginning of this nightmare on the Aurora and the Horizon. Their deaths had not been in vain. Earth had struck back, and the galaxy would never forget it. The neutral station floated in the empty space between star systems, far from any world or civilization. It was a place designed for meetings between enemies, a place where treaties were signed and wars were ended. For the first time in its long history, it would host negotiations between the Galactic Council and a species they had failed to destroy. Ambassador Lisa Monroe walked through the station's corridors with her head held high. Captain Daniel Hayes walked beside her, his ribs still wrapped in bandages beneath his uniform. Admiral Rebecca Torres completed the group, her eyes sharp and watchful as they approached the meeting chamber. Inside, representatives from all 12 council species waited. They sat in chairs that had been lowered to human height, a small concession that spoke volumes about how much had changed. Gone was the arrogance that had filled their voices during the first meeting. Now they looked at the human delegation with something close to respect. High Chancellor Vorthax was notably absent. Lisa had heard that his own people had arrested him for the disaster he had caused. He would face trial and execution for leading the greatest military defeat in Council history. She felt no satisfaction at this news. Too many people had died because of his arrogance. A creature with silver scales and too many eyes spoke first. It was the representative of the Villani species, one of the founding members of the Council. "You have requested this meeting to discuss terms. We are prepared to listen." Lisa stepped forward. Her voice was calm and clear, the voice of someone who knew she held all the cards. "The terms are simple. First, the Council will recognize Earth and all human colonies as sovereign territories. No Council ship will enter human space without explicit permission." The Villani representative nodded slowly. "This is acceptable." "Second," Lisa continued, "the Council will pay reparations for the unprovoked attack on our diplomatic mission. You murdered 200 people who came to you in peace. There must be consequences for that crime." Several aliens shifted uncomfortably in their seats, but no one objected. Lisa pressed on. "Third, and most importantly, the Council will end its policy of subjugating younger species. Every civilization in this galaxy has the right to determine its own destiny. The days of conquest and slavery are over." Now the chamber erupted in protest. Voices in a dozen languages shouted objections and warnings. The Council had maintained order through fear for 50,000 years. Abandoning that approach threatened everything they had built. Daniel stepped forward, and his voice cut through the noise like a blade. You have two choices. Accept these terms and begin a new era of cooperation, or refuse, and watch as we share our weapons technology with every species you have ever oppressed. Silence fell over the chamber. The aliens looked at each other with expressions of barely concealed terror. They knew what humans were capable of now. They knew that the weapons which had shattered their fleet could shatter their entire empire. You would doom the galaxy to chaos, the Villani representative said quietly. Lisa shook her head. We would give the galaxy freedom. What each species does with that freedom is their own choice, just as it should be. The negotiations continued for 3 more days. In the end, the Council accepted every term. They had no other option. The universe they had dominated for 50 millennia was changing, and they could either adapt or be swept away. Back on Earth, President Nathan Clark addressed humanity for the final time as a wartime leader. The evacuation was over. Billions of people had returned to their homes beneath the open sky. Children played in parks again. Couples walked hand in hand through streets that had been empty just weeks before. My fellow humans, the president said, his words broadcast to every corner of the planet. We have survived the greatest threat our species has ever faced. We have lost much. Friends, family members, the brave men and women who gave their lives so that the rest of us might live. We will never forget their sacrifice. He paused, and when he continued, his voice was stronger. But we have also gained something precious. We have proven that humanity will not be conquered. We will not be enslaved. When darkness comes for us, we stand together, and we fight. In the years that followed, Earth took its place among the stars. Human colonies spread across a dozen worlds. Human ships traveled routes that had once been forbidden to them. Human ambassadors sat in the halls of power where they had once been dismissed as insects. The relationship between humanity and the Council was never easy. Old prejudices died slowly, and there were many who resented the changes that had been forced upon them. But there were also those who welcomed the new era, aliens who had grown tired of endless wars and meaningless conquest. Daniel Hayes retired from active service and returned to Earth. He spent his days with his wife and daughter, teaching his little girl about the stars and the wonders that waited among them. Sometimes, late at night, he still dreamed about the battle, about the friends he had lost, and the impossible victory they had won. But when he woke, he was not afraid. He was grateful. Lisa Monroe continued her work as a diplomat, building bridges between species that had never known anything but conflict. It was slow, frustrating work, but she believed in its importance. Every treaty she negotiated, every friendship she forged, made the galaxy a little safer for everyone. Admiral Torres took command of Earth's new defensive fleet, a force of over 200 vessels armed with weapons that made the Council tremble. She hoped they would never have to use those weapons again, but she trained her crews as if war could come at any moment. Peace, she knew, was only possible when you were strong enough to defend it. And throughout the galaxy, the story of Earth spread. It was told in taverns and throne rooms, in schools and temples, on worlds that humanity would never visit. The story of the small blue planet that refused to surrender. The story of the primitive species that looked extinction in the eye and struck back with fury beyond imagining. Other species began to question the old order. They looked at humanity and saw that resistance was possible, that freedom was achievable. Slowly, carefully, the foundations of the Council's empire began to crumble. Vorthax had wanted to make an example of Earth. He had succeeded, but not in the way he intended. Instead of showing the galaxy the price of defiance, he had shown them the power of courage. He had given hope to every oppressed species in the universe. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage with fire and blood. But they stayed with something far more valuable, the promise that no species, no matter how small or young, had to accept tyranny as their fate. The stars no longer looked like the eyes of predators watching from the darkness. They looked like doorways, like possibilities, like the beginning of a story that would never truly end. And somewhere out among those stars, the children of Earth were just getting started.